All right, in this video, we're going to take this Canon R8 camera and we're going to scan it with this Creately Raptor 3D laser scanner. And that will allow us to take this 3D scan of this camera and build some accessories for it later on. And the first accessory that we're going to build is a little grip to go on the bottom of this camera because this camera is way too small for my hands. So I need a little bit of a grip so my fingers don't fall off underneath the bottom here. All right, let's get started. Okay, so the first step is I took the lens off this camera so that I can scan just the camera body because I really want to get a good definition about where this lens mounts. And so when I'm designing things for it later, I've got really just the camera itself. And if I wanted to, I could scan the lens separately and then merge the models together. But in this case, I'm just going to scan this camera body because I really just want to build some accessories for the camera body itself. And I'm really concerned about the bottom here because that's where our grip is going to go that I'm designing. All right, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to take this camera body and we need to put some tracking dots on it. And the tracking dots are going to do a couple of things for us. Now, the tracking dots are used by the laser scanner to know where it is in 3D space around the part that's being scanned. But the tracking dots can also help us merge multiple scans together. So this camera, it's not possible for me to scan the whole thing in one go. I'm going to have to scan one side of it and the bottom and another side and then merge those scans together at the end. And the way that I'm going to do that is by putting tracking dots on this camera. I'm going to be able to see those dots when I'm scanning and then also when I merge the message at the end. So on here, I've got tracking dots. You can see these little reflective stickers, and those are going to go on the camera. So let's go ahead and do that now. So tracking dots come in two different sizes. They come in 3mm and 6mm, most common. And I have a lot of 6mm dots that are on my my turntable here and on these little funny angle things here that put the tracking dots so that the laser scanner can see it. So what I like to do is I like to put the smaller dots on the object for a couple of reasons. One, because when I'm scanning the tracking dots originally, I can see where those are and I can make sure that those tracking dots get picked up by the laser scanner. And then also the smaller dots are just easier to get rid of later on in the scan. So I'm going to take these little tracking dots and I'm going to put a couple on each side of the camera where that I know the laser will see it, and then where I know that I want the laser to be able to see it on multiple sides so I can use those to merge later on. So I'm going to stick these dots on here, and there is a thing in the software that allows us to automatically sort of take these dots out of the final model so that we won't be seeing them later on. So I'm going to stick probably about 3 to 4 dots kind of on each side of the camera, and then I will be ready to scan. So I'll fast forward this part up for you. Okay, so if you see, I got the dots on the camera here. They're kind of all over the place. I have 3 or 4 sort of on each side. And one thing to remember is you want to make sure these dots are really kind of in random places. And then also you want to stick them on flat surfaces. So they don't do any good if they're like teetering on a corner or something like that, because if they move, it could cause the scan to fail. So I've got several dots on here. You can see I've got like some on the bottom here. I've got some on the front. I've got some on the top, and then I've got some on either side. So I've got plenty of tracking dots here. Now, it is important to remember that I'll probably be able to scan most of the top half of this camera in one shot, because if I stick it like this, it's just the bottom will get cut off, and then we'll flip it around and we'll scan the bottom, and then we'll need to align those. So we'll need to make sure that there's enough overlap in our scans. We need to see at least 3 of these dots in our scans, and ideally you'd have like 1 or 2 on one side and 1 on the bottom. So just to give us the best chances, I like to put stickers sort of all over the place. Then you may notice on here, I've got these little 3D printed things that kind of stick up. I don't want the camera to sit all the way at the bottom because then I won't be able to get laser sort of down low. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to elevate the camera on these little riser thingies, and then I'm going to stick it here like this. And then I'm going to move these risers so they're kind of all in the position to where I can get a good scan as I'm rotating this thing here. And also so that the laser can see as many of these tracking dots as possible. because the first step that we're going to do is we're actually going to take a scan of just the tracking dots itself, and then we're going to be able to come up and scan the object once the scan sort of knows where all those tracking dots are. So, all right, so I'm going to put my tracking dots here off to the side where the laser can't see it. And I'm going to go ahead and fire up the software. All right, so we're ready to start scanning the camera. The first thing I'm going to do is turn the computer onto this extreme performance here, because that is what's going to make this computer run at maximum performance. We're going to be pushing a lot of data through the computer, so we're going to need to really set it up in just gaming mode. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the Creately Scan software, and it's going to detect the scanner, and I'm going to hit new project, and I'm going to give it a name. All right, so I've got the name set, and it brings me into this configuration page. And really the first thing I'm going to want to do is choose between blue laser mode or infrared mode. And since this is a kind of a small object and I've got the tracking dots, I'm going to do the blue laser mode. If you're doing larger objects, you need less resolution, you can use the infrared mode, and then you don't need the tracking dots or as many of them. The first thing I'm going to set is the real-time resolution, and I've done this sort of thing before, so I know that about 0.2 works. Now, if this was a bigger object, I might slide it further over, but basically, the more to the left the slider is, the bigger file you're going to have because the more detail you're going to have. But if you have too much detail, the scanner has a little bit of a hard time picking everything up. So really, this is a good compromise of finding good scanning level detail. And you may have to scan it a couple times and play around to get the right resolution for what you're scanning. So don't be afraid to do that. I'm going to leave color mapping off because I don't need that, and it doesn't do a really awesome job on smaller objects like this with a lot of detail. So I'm going to leave that off. And I'm going to leave exclude flat base off on no, because the software right now doesn't do a super awesome job of that. All right, so then the next thing I'm going to do is going to hit scan down here at the bottom, and it's going to bring me into the scanning page. Now there's a couple things to notice on the scanning page. You have a little graph here, and it shows you when the scanner is at a good distance from the object, and it'll turn green. And when it's not at a good distance, it'll be blue. And then also the scanner has a little button here, and that button changes color with whatever this graph is lined up to. So that's a really handy feature there. And then you'll notice over here you have exposure and brightness. So right now it's set to manual for IR exposure. I'm going to put that on auto. And that's going to do is make these tracking dots either brighter or dimmer. And really you want to see green dots because that's when it's picking them up and it knows it's good. But in this little corner box over here, you should see some fairly well lit tracking dots. And then down at the bottom, you have scan mode, and it starts out in point cloud. And I'm going to actually change this to do global marker scan. So that's what I'm going to do to start this thing off, is just to scan all of these tracking dots and create a good map of that. And that will help me when I scan this thing later on. All right, so let's go ahead and scan these tracking dots. I'm going to hit the button on the scanner here. And now I am scanning the tracking dots. And you'll notice that these tracking dots are starting to pick up over here. And I'm just going to go around this a couple of times. Now you'll notice we're picking up lots and lots of tracking dots, which is good. I want to make sure that I have all of the dots specifically on the camera itself. And so that's why I like to use the smaller dots, because when I'm using the smaller dots, I can really differentiate between the dots that are sort of on on the table and on these little scanning things here, and then the ones that are on the camera itself. All right, and if you lose tracking, just kind of move it around until it finds itself again. That just means it's not seeing enough tracking dots. All right, so now I'm going to hit stop, and I'm going to go over here and I'm going to click on point cloud, and it's going to say complete global marker scan. Click on yes. And it's going to say optimizing. And then once it's done optimizing, then we're ready to actually do our first scan on the part. All right, so it's done with the marker scan, and it is ready to start scanning the item. So I'm going to double check to make sure that my laser lines are green. That means I have good brightness on them. and I've got automatic exposure on for the tracking markers. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit this button here to actually start scanning the part. And I want to move the scanner in or out till I make sure I get to the optimal distance. And then once I do, you're going to see that this thing is going to start scanning and seeing things. So you'll see some red, and then all of a sudden it'll turn green. When it turns green, that means that you've got enough points there for it to decide what the object is. And you see this kind of camera shape sort of start to come alive here. And I'm moving it around and I'm sort of moving it up and down. And what that's going to do is give me lots of overlapping laser lines here, so I don't have, you know, sort of these laser patterns. And as I come around, you'll notice that things are starting to take shape here. And you'll notice that you can see the tracker markers there on the side of the camera. They're turning red and green. So that means that the laser is seeing those markers and it can identify where they are. And one thing I can do too is on the back of the scanner here, there is a plus and a minus. And what I can do is I can actually use the plus and kind of zoom in, and that will allow me to kind of see a little more detail kind of where I'm scanning. You'll notice if I get the angle too high here, then the tracking will be lost. This is where having the dots on the camera itself really helps the laser sort of know where it's at. You'll notice I still have a little bit of red here, but I'm not worried about that too much because we're going to really pick that up on the other side of the scan when we do the bottom. All right, so I think I've got enough now. I'm going to hit the pause button here on the top of the scanner. And then over here on the right side of the screen, I'm going to hit the stop button. And complete scanning, I'm going to click yes. All right, so now I have the raw scan, but if you'll notice here, I've got lots of data that I don't really need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate this thing around to the top. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this lasso tool. I'm going to hold the left shift button, and I'm going to draw kind of a sloppy box around this camera from the top. And you'll notice that it's going to select the camera. And what I'm going to do is hit invert selection. And when I hit invert selection, now everything else but the camera is selected. I'm going to go ahead and delete all that and just zap it on out of there, right? So then what I can do is I can zoom in here and I can take this lasso again. And again, the left shift key, and I'm going to go around and I'm just going to kind of select all this stuff that I don't want. And then I'm going to hit the delete, and you'll see I've got a little bit of a thing here. Just going to delete that, right? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to do another scan of the bottom here, so we don't have to worry too much about, you know, if we cut a little bit of this off, that's okay. And then I'm going to go over here, but I'm going to look at the resolution. Remember, the resolution I did originally was 0.2, so I'm going to put that at 0.2. And then I'm going to leave everything else the same, and I'm going to click on optimize. So I'm going to optimize this point cloud, and it's going to take just a minute here. While this is optimizing, I'm actually going to take this camera and I'm going to flip it upside down now. And the trick now is because the bottom was kind of really flat, it kind of rested on two of these easily. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to move this so that I can flip this thing upside down and get it to rest on three of these. And that seems to be pretty good. You want to make sure this is stable, because if this moves at all while you're scanning it, then basically your scan's going to fail. So now I've got the camera flipped upside down. And again, all these tracking markers that I have all over this thing, that's really going to help me when I try and pull these two meshes together. And boom, there we are. We've got a nice optimized model. We can scan in, and yeah, it looks like it's doing a pretty good job. All right, so I'm not going to worry too much about these holes here, because we'll close those up when we mesh it at the end. But as you can see, we got some nice detail. We can actually see the texture and the grip. We can actually read the Canon that's around the top there. And if I look at all the knobs and buttons and switches, I can really see a lot of good detail there. So I think we've got a pretty good scan here. All right, so the next thing we need to do is we need to start a new scan for the bottom half of this. So I'm going to click on the new scan button up here in the top left. and then it's going to bring me back to that configuration page. So if you mess up your laser resolution or whatever, don't worry about it. You can always do multiple scans, and you can always change the figure here on this page. So this is set from what it was before. I'm just going to hit scan, and now I'm going to need to do the global marker scanning again. So I'm going to check that box, and I'm going to hit the play button here. And just like I was doing before, I'm going to scan all these markers. I'll go around it a couple of times. I want to really make sure I get the markers on the camera itself. So that's where I like making sure that those are the smaller markers because I can see the difference between them. And if I use my mouse here, I can actually zoom in here a little bit and make sure that I get all of those markers on the camera. And I think we're doing a pretty good job there. One of the biggest mistakes you can make is not scanning and putting enough markers on your object because then the scanner really has a hard time of knowing where it is, and then it makes it harder to merge the scans later on. All right, so I'm going to call that good. I'm going to hit the button on the top of the scanner, and I'm going to check point cloud and hit complete global marker scan. It's going to take just a minute. So remember, we already have most of this camera scanned except for the bottom here. So I'm going to spend most of my time really just making sure I have the bottom third of the camera scanned, because I'm probably just going to go ahead and delete most of everything else in the end. So I'm going to start my scan here, and it's going to start picking up points. And you can see the top of the camera is scanning really good. Now, I really want to make sure that I get all the detail on the bottom of this camera, because for what I'm going to be doing is designing a grip that goes on the bottom of this. So this screw hole here is really important to me, and also these other holes are going to be important because I'm going to need to design in some pins to the grip to make sure that it doesn't rotate. So you notice if I get too close, then it says not enough markers. It needs, I think, 3 or 4 markers to really identify where it is. You can see it's picking up those markers on the side really nicely. I'm trying to get down here because the top scan, it had a hard time underneath where the lens goes. Now what's amazing is this laser scanner is taking so much work out of building accessories for these cameras, because you know, the way I used to do this is I would measure things and print things out, and then, you know, have to make adjustments and then measure them and print them again. It really is kind of a miracle that it can do all this quickly. All right, so I hit the pause button on the back of the scanner. I'm going to rotate this model around and make sure that, you know, I've got kind of everything that I want scanned. There's a little bit of red missing here on the front of this grip, so I might go back and get that. The rest of this is looking all pretty good. So I'm going to come back here to the front of this grip, and I'm going to hit the play button again, and that's going to start scanning. And that's when I can go ahead and get the rest of this grip kind of filled in. Having this turntable really makes this job a whole lot easier, because all you have to do is sort of move it with your fingers. Awesome. All right, I'm going to hit the pause button there, and I'm going to hit the stop button over here and hit complete scanning. Yes. All right, so again, I'm going to rotate this thing to the top view, and I'm going to take the lasso tool and hit the shift key. I'm kind of draw around this camera here, and everything that I don't want is on the outside. So now I need to hit the invert selection and then hit the delete key, and you'll notice it deleted everything except where I drew. And now, because I have most of this camera already, I'm actually going to go with the square selection. So I'm going to hit shift and go with the square selection. I'm going to rotate it a little bit more like that. All right. Now I can go over here, and I don't need anything past the top of the sensor there. So I'm going to hit delete, and that should give me enough to merge. All right, so now I'm going to go back to the optimize here and go to point 2 and hit optimize. Okay, so now that we have the point cloud, the next thing we need to do is we need to merge our scan 1 and our scan 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this point cloud merging, and we're going to use the marker merge feature. So I'm going to click scan 1 in the fixed window and scan 2 in the float window. And what I need to do is I need to find at least 3 markers that are common between both of these. So if I rotate this around like the other model is, okay, I can see that this one is the same. So I'm going to click shift there and shift there. And then I'm maybe going to do this other bottom one here. I'll do shift there and shift there. And then it didn't really pick up any markers on that side, which is too bad. And it didn't really pick up any markers on the front side. And it saw the marker on this side on here, but not on here. So we really need to pick another point, and we may have to actually go ahead and scan this one again. But anyhow, I'm going to try and pick this point here as blue, and I think it's that point there is blue. And I'm going to hit start, and it looked like it merged it pretty good. I would say that's a successful merge. And so hit yes. And then what it's going to do is it's going to create an optimized component. And then I'm going to click exit merging. All right, so now I've got my point clouds merged together, but I don't yet have a mesh. I just have a model with a bunch of points. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to mesh setting. And if I look up here, I have 131, 36, 37 points. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that I have around the same amount of faces as the points here. So, and you don't have to get too exact. I'm at 143. Denoise, I'm going to put it at 1 or 2. And I'm going to click on hole filling and closure. And then I'm going to click on this mesh button here. And then it's going to take a little bit to mesh it. And then once it's meshed, now we can export the model. All right, so now we've got a meshed model, and I can rotate it around here. You'll notice it did close up all those holes that we had before, which is nice. And we have a pretty good looking model here. We can see the texture in the grip, and we can even read R8 over here. I can see all the buttons and the dials. I can almost read the text on the buttons. And more importantly, if I go to the bottom here, I can see that I have good definition of all those holes. These are probably the 2 holes that I'm going to use for those anti-rotation pins on the bottom of this grip. I can read the text on the bottom there. So I'd say this is a pretty good model here. So what we're going to do is we're going to export it. So we'll go over to the export button. And then I like to export, you can, for this kind of a model, you can do a poly, an STL, or an OBJ. I'm going to just export this as an STL for now. I'm going to call it Canon R8. And I'm just going to hit save. Well, I already have a folder called Canon R8, so I'll just call it Canon R8 2. -2. All right, and then I'm going to save it. And then I also like to save it as an OBJ because depending on where I'm using it, it may or may not want an object file over a still. But either one of those files should work. So I'm going to save it as an OBJ. And there we are, we're all done. So now the next step is I can take this 3D mesh model file, I can bring it into my drawing system and actually 3D design parts that fit exactly to this 3D scan. All right, that's it for this video. I hope you liked it. If you want to see more of what we do, check us out at check6.shop.